Welcome, everyone. I'm Kurt, and these are my thoughts on education. All right, so for episode two, I'm going to talk about the Taiwan Bilingual 2030 policy. This has been in effect for a number of years already, and it's actually been quite controversial around Taiwan with the teachers and students and parents and educators alike. So I thought maybe I'd give my take on it today because I usually get a lot of questions, and I have done a little bit of research on it as well. So we know when the policy was first introduced and it started to be carried out around Taiwan at all levels of schools, there was a very mixed bag of feelings about that. A lot of teachers were excited, and a lot of teachers were terrified, especially those who've never used English before. And all of a sudden, they're being pushed by their schools to start using English in class. And so immediately, there's lots of training. The government has done a very good job of providing funds and projects for schools in order to hire teachers, train teachers, carry out workshops. But maybe due to the hectic nature of it, a lot of people really still kind of doubt what's going on, or they have a lot of questions. So I thought today I would go over some of the questions that I get and maybe just kind of talk a little bit about it from my perspective. So I've got 3 or 4 big questions here. And the first one, I mean, we have to start at the very beginning. And what's the real purpose of this policy? I'm not going to get into the political aspects of it because that's not my place. But per definition of the policy itself, this is more of an economic power move by the policymakers here in Taiwan, in that we want it to be an economic advantage for the people and obviously the country overall. And it's kind of a twofold process or a twofold purpose here, in that we want Taiwan to be an attractive place for people to come from other countries to invest their money, to get jobs here. And to do that, there needs to be a lot of English. And I can say from my perspective, I moved here about 25 years ago. And when I first came here, there was literally no English. It was very hard to get around. We didn't have Google Translate or ChatGPT, any of these wonderful tools that we have now. And so it was quite challenging for me to order food. They even get coffee back then. It was tough to get around. Maps, everything was in Chinese. And when you got an English version, there's usually a lot of mistakes. And so my point about this is, obviously more English, this is a good thing to attract foreign investors, foreign visitors, because they want to also feel that they can survive in this place. Now, the second purpose is for our citizens, our students. We want to give them an advantage in the future because of their English ability, since you can use English all around the world. They can go study abroad. They can do a master's or PhD abroad. They can get jobs in international companies. And as a professor in the English department, I see this all the time. I get countless numbers of students who are asking me for reference letters to apply to colleges in the US, in England, Australia, and on, and also for practice for job opportunities as well. So obviously, and everybody knows this, these are realistic goals and realistic outcomes for our students. Okay, so that is the purpose. So if we're thinking long term, we want our students to have these more open doors for them in the future. We can back that up then into what's happening now. We want them to be able to use English. And so this is where our first real issue is in Taiwan, is that because of the nature of education here, it's very teacher dominated and it's very test based. So because it's test based, teachers need to prepare students for exams all the time. And what usually gets lost in the teaching methodologies the communication aspect of using the language. We're learning English as a subject rather than a language. Now that's fine for passing a test that's mostly focused on grammar, vocabulary, and some reading comprehension. But in order to interview in foreign countries, or to be able to actually get a job where communication is at the core, they need more practice using the language. Now this is where the first real issue happens. And so this is the main goal then of the classroom teacher, is we're not just improving their English at a linguistic or academic level, we're also trying to create environments so that students are able to take what they learn in the classroom and use it outside. As we know in teaching circles, we have EFL and ESL. And we know that ESL first. ESL is English as a second language. And that is where you learn the language in the context where the language is spoken outside of the classroom. So for example, you live in Taiwan, you move to the USA, or you move to Canada or Australia, where English is the mother tongue, it's the spoken language there. So when you leave the classroom, English is still all around you. You are going to learn English everywhere. You go to the store, you watch TV, everything's in English. But when you are an EFL student, English as a foreign language, 95 to 100% of your learning opportunities are in the classroom only. And so the teachers of these classes are so important, because it's your classroom where they are going to get the opportunities to actually use and learn how to use English for real, authentic purposes. So this is, if we take the policy at its definition, we're trying to promote the ability to use English, then that should be what the teachers are focused on the most in the classroom. Okay, so this is our purpose. Now, if we back up and look at the policy itself, my next big question that I get and I have is, were we prepared for the implementation of the policy? And the fast answer is definitely not. The policy was very rushed, and it was thrown at all levels of schooling at the same time: high school, college, junior high school, and elementary school. And I think this is where most of the anxiety for teachers came from, is that, okay, I'm a high school teacher and I teach math, or I teach biology, or even PE, it doesn't matter what the subject is. I've only ever used Chinese to teach my classes before. My students have only ever had to speak Chinese in my class. And now you're asking me to put English in. But the problem is, if you're doing that at the high school level, of course, the students are not prepared. Those who are not as good at English, all of a sudden they have to use high school level English in their class. There's a huge disconnect here. Of course, this cannot work. I understand why they did it the way they did it, because if you just throw everything out there, eventually the system will catch up. Those students who are learning in elementary school at the very beginning, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, in 9 years' time, when they get to high school and they get to grade 12, they should be more prepared for this type of bilingual instruction. Now, the second part about it is, I think when it was first introduced, basically if you're in elementary school, junior, senior high school, you could apply to the government for funding for a bilingual program. So you've got just numerous schools all getting these projects, but they're all defining bilingual education a little bit differently. If there's a professor in charge of their project, they interpret it differently. Some are pushing CLIL, some are pushing EMI, some are pushing sheltered models, immersion models. It is all of these different definitions and theories being thrown around. And I think it made it a little bit too haphazard in the beginning. So no one's really sure what's going on. So I think it was a little bit rushed at the beginning. Okay, so move on then to the next question is, can it work? And my easy answer is definitely it can work. Anything can work if it's planned properly and we take the time to carefully think about what's best for the students, what's best for teachers, how do we get there and really organize things in a way that can make it better for teachers. But for it to work, there are some obstacles, I believe, that need to be considered. And the first one is that our policy, the Bilingual 2030 policy, its success is based on English proficiency. So when students graduate from senior high school, they should be at a certain level of English. And the last time I checked the policy, we had the 50-50-50 goals, which is 50% of graduating students from high school should be at the CEFR B2 level of English for all 4 skills. And then at the university level and the master's level, 50% of classes should be taken in English. And 50% of, I'm a little off on this one, of MA students should be taking their classes in all English as well, regardless of department. Whether you're an English major or math major, it doesn't matter. You should be taking half of your classes in English. So there should be more of an EMI-centered approach at the university level. But anyways, regardless of what the finer details are, the main policy success will be based on English proficiency. However, if you look at the definition of the policy itself, content learning, of course, is still the main goal. So there's a little bit of a disconnect here, because we are saying whether or not the policy is successful is based on English proficiency, but teachers are told that content learning, of course, is still the most important. And our policy is what we call non-compulsory gradual approach, which means teachers get to decide whether or not they use 80% English, 20% English. And so it makes it really hard to base the success on students' English proficiency if teachers are allowed to pull back on how much English they use. And so I think there needs to be a little bit of repair or realignment here on the goals. I think that there needs to be a way to make it successful, and it needs to be mandatory for the schools to do it in the way that's going to show us success or not. Okay, the second obstacle is that, so this one I mentioned already. Classes are meant to promote communication and authentic language use, but the education system is still built on testing. So if we want these classes to be more student-centered, more independent learning, more authentic type learning, we have to do something about the testing-based nature of our education here in Taiwan. And I think this is the hardest one to fix, but something needs to be done in order to allow teachers to feel safe enough to pull back on the test prep nature of their classes and actually do more hands-on type learning, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning. These are things that should be done for really deepening our students' learning of the content. Right now, it's quite surface level because everything is about memorization. Without going too far off topic, in a teacher-centered classroom where the teacher is dominating, they're giving all the input. If you think back to Bloom's taxonomy, and we talk about the different levels of cognition, the thinking levels of thinking skills, we're only activating the lower order processing skills in a teacher-dominated classroom. But we want those higher order thinking skills activated to really promote deeper learning. And that's not happening in a teacher-dominated class. However, teachers are afraid that if they let it be more student-centered, a little bit more interactive, that students will not be prepared for their exams. And if they don't do as well on these exams, then that comes back to the teacher, and this creates a snowball effect of problems for them. Parents get involved, principals get involved, and so there needs to be some realignment here. Okay, on top of this obstacle is this idea of student-centered versus teacher-centered. We know that traditionally Taiwan is a very teacher-centered education system. It's really, really hard to get experienced teachers to just change the way that they've taught for all these years. And so it's really necessary that we target the pre-service teachers now and push this idea of, look, students can still learn the content even if you are not doing 2 practice tests a week or 3 practice tests or however many practice tests you give them. Instead, you do more authentic type inquiry-based learning. They can still learn the content. So I think our focus, if we're going to make this all work, we really need to target our pre-service teachers. Okay, now the other big question is how much English, this is what teachers will ask me, how much English should be used and what levels of English for teachers and students. So obviously, if you're going to teach in a bilingual program and you want to offer at least 50% English, the teacher's English level needs to be high enough that you're able to do that. You don't have to have perfect English. And of course, your students may have better English than you. That's totally fine. You are the subject master. You don't have to be the English master. If you're not teaching English, you're teaching your own subject. But you still have to be at an acceptable level. I can't say for sure what that is. Many programs require at least B2, but in some European countries, it's C1 at the minimum. So I think teachers need to be very honest with themselves. If you're still at a B1 level, it may be very hard for you to implement bilingual education. So, you can train yourself, you can practice, you can test yourself, you can take classes if that's something that you're interested in doing. But I think, and I know here in Taiwan that the government originally said you must be at least B2 in order to do bilingual training. But what they found out was there weren't enough teachers at that level. And so they lowered it and said, that's okay for now, but eventually we'll get there to the B2. Okay, and the key, and I'm not going to talk about this too much in this episode, maybe I will in a future episode, but the key is to use pedagogical translanguaging. And that's from the teacher side and the student side. And, at the basic definition of translanguaging is allowing students and teachers to use all of the languages that they have in their language repertoire in order to make successful output, to be able to understand input. And teachers need to learn how to do that. It's not as simple as doing code switching or code mixing or translating. That's not what it is. It is intentional planning of when to use the different languages, which language for input, which language for output. And I think if you're a teacher and your English levels aren't as good, it's still okay for you to use Chinese in the classroom, but you're still giving students English input in other ways and pushing them to have English output. Okay, so if we look at the policy as a whole, obviously when this is done at the higher levels of the government, we can look at LPP framework. So LPP is language policy and planning. And a model that I have looked at in my own research is Kaplan and Baldauf's model. And there are 6 primary objectives for language in education planning. And I think that if we look at these 6 and then tie them back to the Taiwan policy, we can see whether or not we are really prepared for success. So the first objective, of course, is the target population. Who is this policy for? And what language are they going to learn? Of course, we know that the target really is our students. I know it's for everyone, but we're really focused on the students in school. And the language, of course, is English. This does create a problem, though, because as I mentioned before, in Taiwan, we are learning English as a foreign language, right? But remember that if they don't learn the language in the classroom, they have almost no chance to practice outside of the classroom. So there are certain students who may not do well in the classroom based on the teacher's pedagogy. So for them, they're immediately going to fail. Or what about students who maybe don't go to class Now, this shouldn't be a huge problem in Taiwan, but what about homeschooled students or students who are sick? Then they're immediately out because they won't be able to keep up. So there are some issues here, but in general, most students should have the same opportunity. Okay, but the second one in LPP, this model, is the teacher supply. So where do the teachers come from and how will they be trained? Now this creates a whole other set of issues when we start talking about who should be teaching these bilingual classes. Should it be English teachers? Well, that's not fair to the English teachers to start teaching other subjects that they're not as trained in. Should it be the subject teachers? Well, that might not be fair for them because they are masters of their content, but maybe English isn't as strong for them. So there needs to be that type of perfect teacher who knows their content very well and they also are able to use English very well. Now, the third option is the foreign teacher who should be versed in both the content knowledge and English as well. The problem, though, is trying to attract these type of teachers to come to Taiwan, and this creates all kinds of problems. In order to attract them, you need to pay more, but when you pay more, that creates issues in the classroom with the the Taiwanese teachers because maybe they already feel qualified to do the job. They probably are qualified to do the job, but they're making less money than the person who's brought in to teach in their classroom. Some teachers feel that the foreign teachers that come in, they're not really qualified. It's more of a foreign face rather than a qualified bilingual teacher. And so maybe they need to help fix a lot of the mistakes that they make in class. And to be honest, without getting too political on this, some schools may hire students who are not even teachers yet, but they are foreigners, in order to show that, hey, we've got foreign teachers in our school, but actually they're not really qualified teachers yet. And so there's a lot of issues with this. Training as well, universities like mine, we are running training programs, but I don't know how regulated all of the programs are, and I don't know how serious the schools are. And the other issue is training is happening while they're teaching. And so, of course, it's hard to learn and do at the same time. So again, the focus really needs to be on the pre-service teachers right now and make sure that when they graduate and they start teaching, they're already versed in how to do bilingual teaching. Because teaching a bilingual class doesn't mean translating. Obviously, there are new pedagogies that need to be used. Okay, the third objective in this model is the syllabus. And the big question is, what level should it begin at? My opinion is that it should have started in primary school first. And once those students graduated from primary school, then we should have started it in secondary school after that. Kind of follow each year by year when the students move up. I think over 12 years, we could have gone from grade 1 to grade 12, every year adding a new grade, but it didn't happen that way. So I think that what's more important right now is that there is a very strict syllabus for those schools who want to do bilingual education. So if you want to run a bilingual program, I think you need to meet certain targets. And that should be, okay, in grade 1, how much English should be allowed or used? And in how many classes? What percentage should be used? I think it needs to be strict. I know that we're using the non-compulsory gradual approach right now, but I think it's too open for interpretation that way. For me, I can just translate a list of 10 words and say, oh, I have a bilingual class. But that's not really bilingual education, right? So I think it needs to be stricter and then say, okay, look, how many schools do we want in Kaohsiung City running a bilingual program? Okay, we want 10 schools. All right, so you need to apply and you need to prove that you are going to follow these particular methods. And then just say, like, at this school, we run a bilingual program. And so, parents, teachers, students, everyone can decide whether or not they want to be in the bilingual program or not. I think it will be more effective. Okay, the next one is the next objective in this model are the methods and materials. So we need to really figure out what's the teaching methods or the teaching pedagogy we use to teach the language. And I talked about this already. It needs to be more of a student-centered, hands-on approach to allow them to use the main goal in these methodologies should be students need to produce their own English output. It can't just be answering teacher questions. They have to produce longer stretches of English in speaking and in writing. Okay, then the next objective is the resources. So what's the cost to provide this education? That's way above my pay grade, so I can't say too much. But from interviewing teachers and discussing this topic on end, it seems like most schools are happy with the amount of funding that the government gives. So I think this part is okay. And then the last one is assessment and evaluation. So what level of proficiency will students have at each learning stage? And I think this needs to be much more detailed. I've investigated bilingual program goals and objectives from other countries like the USA, and theirs are so detailed. At every level, it tells exactly what the students can do with the language. And I think that we need to create something like that because teachers need to see, okay, I teach grade 1, I teach grade 2, I teach grade 3, I teach grade 7, whatever grade you teach. They need to know by the end of this grade, what level of English are my students expected to be at? And that way we can assess it all the way from beginning to end. But it can't be random. And I think this is the biggest problem, is it seems to be a little bit random right now. Maybe my elementary school runs a bilingual program, but then I go to junior high school and they don't. Or maybe my elementary school didn't, but my junior high school does. So I'm already behind because I didn't have bilingual classes before. I think it needs to be a system where they can follow from beginning to end. Okay, so back to my original question, can it work? Of course. But there needs to be very careful planning. And I believe that these models of LPP, they must strongly correlate to the reality of what's happening. It can't just be a beautiful message or a beautiful theory. We need to be able to carry out and succeed. The final point here that I want to make before wrapping up is that in language policy and planning, the primary agents must be willing to carry out the plan. And in this case, the primary agents are the teachers. They have to be willing to do it. And from my own research that I've done, actually a lot of teachers are on board. They want to get involved, they want to help, but they need to get the proper training. They need to be shown the proper methods. Okay, so that's it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed my short talk on bilingual education. My name is Kurt, and those are my thoughts on education.